May have resigned, but will his successor be any different? The outgoing boss of football's governing body's not gone away yet, by the way. He'll be staying on in Zurich until he oversees new rules for picking the next FIFA boss. What made the 78-year-old former watch salesman throw in the towel just 4 days after winning a resounding re-election to a fifth term? Is there a smoking gun to link Blatter to the U.S. justice system's widening probe of his underlings? On that score, the new U.S. Attorney Generals come out of the land of soccer to rock a seemingly untouchable Swiss-based not-for-profit that rakes in untold billions. Football may be the planet's most popular sport, but business in this case seems to play by American rules. What does it all say about our globalized world? And of course, we'll be asking how football's doing. Millions, if not billions, will be tuning in for Saturday's Champions League final. But just how much has the beautiful game been tarnished? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at life after Blatter. Good governance is, of course, one of the issues we'll be talking about. And good governance high on the mind of Sunny Kapoor, Managing Director of think tank and consultancy Redefine. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome back as well to Brian Schneider, International Editor at News Tank Football.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Tell us what News Tank Football is.
News Tank Football is a strategic business information website. We're a digital agency, and we provide intelligence for managers working in football all across Europe.
All right, so kind of a money baseball, but for football, in other words.
All about the business of football. Okay. It's been a long week. It's been a long week and a half.
He covered the Salt Lake City Olympics bribery scandal. Craig Kapitas, correspondent at large for Quartz and The Atlantic. Welcome back to the show, sir. And a former member of the French Olympic Committee's ethics panel, Vladimir Andreev, president of the International Association of Sports Economists. Thank you for being with us here. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. From a police raid on a posh Swiss hotel to the downfall of the man himself, it has, as Brian just said, been a crazy week for the high halls of footballing power. Aurore Dupuis has more.
Only 4 days into his fifth term, Sepp Blatter resigned, triggering reactions from across the world, including from the football legend Pelé.
I want to see the football put people together, stop the war, to organize anything. You need to have good people.
As for Blatter's rival, Prince Ali, he welcomed the news and hinted that he could run again in the snap presidential election.
I'm very happy that the change happened. And we have to reverse the pyramid. We have to put the priority of players and fans above anyone else.
Football officials and politicians gave their opinion on the corruption crisis that's hit FIFA. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel says Blatter's resignation will help FIFA become more transparent.
For the billions of football fans, it's an important message for all of us who like football. And I too am a fan. That the World Football Organization can be run according to the standards we wish for.
Russia and Qatar, that are set to host the 2018 and 22 World Cups, say preparations continue as planned.
Blatter's decision to step down came as a surprise for us, and for many others in the football industry. It must have been a difficult decision to take.
Sepp Blatter's due to stay in the job until the end of the year. The next FIFA presidential election is expected before March 2016.
All right, in that report, Brian, you heard the German Chancellor saying she hopes that this is all going to make football more transparent. Can you say that she's got a good chance of that, or are you here to dash her hopes?
This is step number one in possibly giving FIFA the chance to reform themselves. This is the necessary precondition for FIFA to kind of clean itself up. But just the absence of Sepp Blatter, who is not even technically absent yet, is not going to do anything. So what has to happen now is they have to figure out who the next president will be, and they need to reform a lot of structures. They've talked about them already. They've talked about setting term limits for presidents and also members of the executive committee. And perhaps just as important, perhaps FIFA will take over vetting the executive committee members themselves to instead of the confederations who do it right now. The confederations have the freedom to pick their own members that go to FIFA, and FIFA has little control over that. So those are two steps that will have to happen very, very quickly.
The fact that Blatter is staying on to oversee these reforms, is that an encouraging step, or does that make you nervous?
For Blatter, at this point, it's all about legacy. He wants to protect his legacy. Somebody talked to him over the weekend and maybe kind of told him what everyone else had already figured out. What we are really, really interested in at News Tank Foot is what happened to make him resign on a Tuesday at nearly 7 p.m. Because his Secretary General, Jerome Valk, has already been put into a legal corner by the FBI. But that's kind of Valk's problem. That's not Sepp Blatter's problem. Blatter could have resigned on Friday. He could have resigned next week. He could have resigned next month. It had the same effect. What happened to make it do it on Tuesday? And our theory is this might be the Swiss justice, that at this point they've got their investigation open, and to perhaps save face a little bit, they need to show that they're running things in their own country. So maybe Sepp Blatter is doing something with the Swiss justice.
Craig Capitas?
Well, Sepp Blatter has not left the room. He's certainly not left the building. And he's still in charge. Why he has stepped down, or allegedly stepping down, probably has some indictments coming against him. But let's get to the heart of this. You know, Blatter could not have succeeded had he operated against the grain of FIFA's culture. This is FIFA's culture. And a large part of FIFA's culture is in compliance and doing business with Western nations, Western sponsors, and Western broadcasters. This is not a can of worms. This is a basket of weasels who have been operating for decades. When I first looked at this, it was back at the U.S. World Cup in '94. There's nothing here that's new. Everyone knew about it, and whenever we wrote stories about it, the response from FIFA, the French Department of Justice, the German Department of Justice was, oh, the fans don't care. They're here to see the games. That's the story of FIFA in a nutshell.
Even less scrutiny. That's an interesting point. Even less scrutiny, you might say, than other transnational institutions like the UN.
Oh, that's true. I mean, but it's two separate things. One is kind of the general international institutional landscape and what this has to do, and maybe
we think of FIFA almost as if it's a UN-like organization.
Excuse me, may I just interject something here? Both the IOC and FIFA back in the 90s hired public relations firms for hundreds of thousands of dollars to lobby the UN into granting them observer status at the UN, sitting next to the Palestinians. These people operated.
They failed, though.
They failed, and they were very angry about that failure.
Sunny Kapoor.
Well, I was going to refer to the IOC. So, you know, the FIFA scandal is part of a pattern of something we've seen before across, in particular, Swiss-based international organizations, but also in general within the sporting community. Cricket has had its share. For example, we've seen scandals in cycling. We've seen scandals in boxing. And wherever there are a small group of individuals in an opaque capacity able to control the flow of large sums of money and dispense favors, we are going to come back to exactly that same consequence. And this has to be tackled systemically or nothing will change. Blatter leaving does very little for that.
And I guess question one, and it brings us back to what Brian was saying about the Swiss wanting to get in the act, is when you say they're tackling it, who tackles it?
Well, very interestingly, I mean, there are precedents. So if you look at UBS and Credit Suisse and other Swiss banks like Julius Baer, in all cases, action over the past 5-6 years has been taken by US authorities into getting the Swiss to then actually try and do something domestically. The Swiss have historically been a tax haven, have had a culture, a corporate culture, which allows things to go on that wouldn't be allowed in many of the other countries which have higher scrutiny. Every country's got double standards. I mean, the US has got its own tax havens. But there has been a systemic problem with Switzerland. I mean, last year, Credit Suisse was hit with the single largest fine that has ever been levied on a bank, about $10 billion US. And I think the Swiss, not just for FIFA alone and historically the IOC, but for everything else that has happened and for how much they have been in the news, in bad press, need to get their act together. And it might actually, hopefully, be a response to this pressure.
Vladimir Andreev, let's just remind our viewers, FIFA based in Zurich, the European governing body based in Nyon, the International Olympic Committee based in Lausanne. Why are all these organizations in Switzerland?
So it has already been told. It's partly due to a tax haven facility, I would say, and also because everyone goes to Switzerland for business and so on. It's very easy. But my own story about the FIFA would be slightly different since I am an economist. For me, FIFA is what I would call a crony networking system, which elaborated on since the 80s. Yeah. And it's not just by chance since the 80s, because since 1981, Blatter was the general secretary of FIFA. And then he took over in 1998 as the president. But the whole system, it's a network, a crony network, and moreover, and this is a part of the achievement of Blatter, it's a globalized network. So in a sense, is accountable for football globalization, which is the good side of the coin. But there is the other side of the coin, which
Does the cronyism extend, in your opinion, as an economist, to the broadcast networks and the sponsors?
Yeah.
Does it?
Yeah, it does. It does, and it does not only to European sponsors, but also American sponsors. You know that Coca-Cola is one of the major sponsors, McDonald's as well.
And the sponsors, as you know, make up approximately only 24% of FIFA's revenue. And you can always, the rest is TV. Yeah. And you can always find another Gazprom to be finding sponsors for the IOC, F1, any of the things have never been a problem. They're lined up. The only sponsor who ever complained was a guy called D'Alessandro at John Hancock in the United States, the insurance company, during the IOC scandal. And he was eviscerated when he pulled his sponsorship. And the reason he pulled his sponsorship was because John Hancock, an insurance company, wasn't selling insurance in any of the third world countries where McDonald's, now we call them emerging markets, where McDonald's and Coke and everyone else wanted to get to. He was the only guy who stood up and complained about this, and he was shouted down by Dick Ebersol, who ran NBC Sports at the time and ran the Olympic broadcast.
Brian Schneider, the broadcasters, what part of responsibility do they bear?
Probably a decent amount here. The sponsors aren't going to do much. I like to call it sponsorship whack-a-mole. As soon as one leaves, another one will pop up to take its place. They'll always be there. The Etihad, the airline, left, and they're going to be replaced by Qatar Airways. So you talk about crony capitalism. The TV rights, that is where the big money is. FIFA released their financials last week. Sponsorship, I think, was 22 or 23%, and the TV rights were 43, 44, 45, almost half. And that's the one we don't know as much as about. It's easy to attack the sponsors. Everyone likes to be anti-corporate these days. But nobody likes to say, oh, I want to boycott my television. So it's harder for fans to latch on to the TV rights.
Well, I mean, it's a monopoly. I mean, it's a very powerful monopoly that is in a position to dispense huge amounts of favors. And you cannot be, for example, the BBC or a dominant network in a country and not broadcast the World Cup. You cannot be a major actor such as McDonald's, Coke, etc., with global business models and not advertise. And so there is a huge lock-in effect. And the power exercised by the individuals, the crony network that ran FIFA is huge. And this is just the revenue part of things. With this revenue comes the ability to dispense huge amounts of monies and favors. And we've seen this pattern in other places. If you just look at the International Whaling Commission, I think, there are a number of countries that are actually landlocked countries that are members, whose vote Japan essentially buys with offers of overseas aid, etc., to get them to vote against a whaling ban. I mean, you know, this is something we've seen in other places too.
But this is, again, where it's fuzzy. Here in France, the Football Federation goes to places where even the police don't go. There are football matches in these working-class suburbs, and it's wonderful for the social fabric of this nation. So you have that at the grassroots level going on, and then you have all this corruption at the top. At what point is it no longer in the public interest? Where do you draw the line?
So the question is, can you have the good side without the bad side? Because there has been a good side. I mean, the expansion, the globalization of football, and the democratization in many ways has been fantastic. And for that, it may have happened without Sepp Blatter. It may have happened only with him. We will never know. But that has been absolutely fantastic. The question is, can this great positive side of globalization, of the democratization of sport, of getting developing countries in, poor neighborhoods in, be done without the patronage, the cronyism, etc.? And I think yes.
I say absolutely no. No. I've covered this thing for too long. Very brief history. How did we get to where we are? It goes back to two friends, Juan Antonio Samaranch and Havelange, who was Blatter's
Samaranch, who was the head of the
IOC and was responsible for that scandal. Now, this is the starting point. Samaranch was Generalissimo Franco's right-hand man. He was his sports minister, never went anywhere without Franco. And Franco was very, very concerned about keeping the rabble out of the streets and going after him. And Samaranch came up with a wonderful idea. He was the first person to come up with this idea. Television had just started in Spain. And Samaranch started broadcasting football games, soccer matches on television, almost 24/7. And people didn't leave their houses. We chronicled all this in the Wall Street Journal series years ago with people who were actually there in the room. And Samaranch realized, and Havelange, that soccer, football, had a powerful political component to keep people quiet, and they would always get their enthusiastic support. Samaranch goes on to become the Spanish ambassador to the Soviet Union. And he takes over from Avery Brundage, the presidency of the IOC. And he realized something, and this is where it really cross-connects with Blatter. Samaranch figured out that he would maintain a power base if he had the Africans, the Latin Americans, the Asians, and the communist bloc behind him. And that is precisely what he did, and he started his own little fiefdom.
Right, and Blatter built a winning machine, which was what we saw last Friday.
That's precisely what happened.
We're going to pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.